Thank you.
So
Hola to me. It is my pleasure to introduce Antoni Gomila, who is professor at the University of the Balearic Islands at the Department of Psychology. Tony wrote recently a book with Diana Perez entitled Social Cognition and the Second Person in Human Interaction. Has been released this year. And Verbal Minds, Language and Architecture of Cognition, in 2011. And Tony has quite a lot of interesting paper published along the years, recent years. One paper especially interesting for me, how the second person dissolve the problem of the other minds. I would like very much to have this paper. If you can send me a copy, I would appreciate very much.
sure.
Okay, okay. Thank you. And without more ado, I give you the floor. Thank you for accepting our invitation in the first place.
No, I felt greatly honored. I'm very happy that there is a seminar or conference on the second person. I started the first paper I published on the second person came out in 2000. It took me a lot of difficulty. I'm very happy that the times have changed. No? As Bob Dylan said, no? The times they are changing, and these ideas are at least focus of a greater interest in more broader and in many different areas. And I'm very honored that you invited me. I have to apologize for not being able to speak in Portuguese or Brasileiro. Obrigado and bon dia. But I understood most of the. I try to follow, but I have to pay to be very concentrated to be able to follow your talks. It's a matter of practice, I think, but speaking is more difficult. So I think it's better I speak in English. No, it's correct. May I share my screen to present? Yeah.
Yeah. You know how to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It works. You can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes. It's
okay.
perfect.
I was doubting until the last minute almost about whether to change my talk. The paper that I contributed to the volume that came out recently, and thanks as well for that, has to do with how to think of the first person point of view of psychological attribution when it's committed to the second person perspective of psychological attribution. But in my thinking, what came out first was the insatisfaction with more or less a standard treatment of or consideration of the first person point of view, and because the reason of the insatisfaction was that it was Cartesian. It was the self-attribution or as a form of self-consciousness and of self-knowledge, as if it were a theoretical achievement and what I began to try to develop is a practical understanding of self-knowledge. That's why the title is Realizing, to emphasize that self-attribution is not transparent and so simple as, or so certain as the Cartesian picture tries to describe. But in trying to revise the features or the marks of the first person point of view, I think it nicely fares with the second person perspective. So I'm going to try to join both. So the menu of the overview of the talk is this introductory topic of how to think of self-knowledge, self-attribution as a form of knowledge, of course, but it can be not from a, it could be vindicated, the practical view of self-knowledge that we, or that was proposed by the Greeks, and it was also a lively idea before Descartes. And that's what the Greek dictum of know yourself, that notis euthon, try to capture. Instead of going straight ahead to the topic, I'm going to detour through a couple of efforts to propose a practical understanding of self-knowledge, self-attribution, but that in my view are not successful because they are still in the grip of the Cartesian image of the phenomenological marks of self-attribution. And we'll try to use this discussion to make clear that we don't have the sort of privileged access to our own mental states as it was assumed by the Cartesian view. And this will give us access, or will converge with the notion of second person attribution. I think Diana already presented, and so I don't go into much detail. And finally, I will try to provide an account of the marks of self-attributions that are not committed to a form of privileged access. So this is more or less what I'm going to try to argue for. What I was about to say this evening, but it's the evening is here, not where you are. So
excuse me,
yeah.
Tony, are you passing the slides because it is always the same on the screen? So,
okay, so
maybe there is a problem here.
We had this problem earlier. Maybe if you
yeah.
Okay.
If I do it this way, you can see the changing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do this way.
Perfect. Thank
So
you.
that was the overview, as I explained, but that we don't go to it. So the first point is to remind that the know yourself was this Gnostic Teuton Delphic oracle that made sense as a call for a reflective, examined life as a basis for wisdom, for a worth life. Life examined, a reflective attitude to one's life. It offers us the way in this Greek conception of self-knowledge. It's a way to improve the quality of our life, the value of our life. But remarkably, in this context, it requires an effort. In this traditional view, the view that Plato describes in the, I think I don't remember which dialogue at this moment, the interpretation that he introduces of the Gnostic Auton makes sense in this in this way, as something that you have to try to achieve because it's not obvious, it's not transparent, it's not something that it's right there. It requires a form of ascesis, of a form of effort. And so the end result is an achievement, is not something that's evident and at hand. No? But also, importantly, it changes our relation to our action. It has an agentive, a practical dimension. And it's what allows us to be fully autonomous, even if the term is comes with Kant. No? But the idea is that if you want to be a prudential, an agent with phronesis, an agent able to navigate his life, one has to become aware of their wishes, desires, frustrations, or deep thoughts, or whatever. As we'll see later, these are notice that these are dispositional states. There are attitudes, not just occurrent conscious mental states. Sorry, so I need to move this way. Against this view, the traditional, the Cartesian one emphasized the evidentiality, the self-certainty of these self-attributions, the attributions in the first person psychological states. I'm certain that I'm dreaming. I'm certain that now I'm I don't know, doubting, whatever. And this made sense within this foundationalist project of epistemology and the theory of knowledge, where he was searching for the certainty, for the most basic form of knowledge over which to build our view of knowledge, or the broad view, the general science, or whatever. In this view that could be discussed to what extent Descartes is really committed to this view, it's sort of an idealization, simplification, but it makes sense because it's this view that's been influential and still is. According to this view, the self-attribution, like I'm doubting or I'm awake or whatever, are transparent. The state is transparent to the subject. The subject just has to observe himself or herself to capture, to grasp the state he's in. And therefore, this attribution is immediately attribution of knowledge. This self-attribution counts as self-knowledge because it's justified immediately by the way it's produced and the marks it's hold to have. It's not even in the deflationary ways that's been introduced in the 20th century as incorrigible, self-intimate, which are variations on the same marks. Interestingly, I think some of the presentations dealt a little bit or have this Wittgensteinian flavor. This conception, this view of self-attribution or first-person attribution, it relies on an implicit view of self-observation as a form of a privileged access that is being argued by Wittgenstein as problematic, as an incorrect or incoherent view of how we self-attribute mental states. It's certain that its phenomenological properties, the way we come to have this, or come to make these attributions, involve an epistemic asymmetry. We don't have to look for information about our body or expressive qualities. It's a different way. It's something that will may reach by introspection or whatever. It has the way it has to be characterized.
And in this way, it's supposed to bestow on these attributions an epistemic authority, that because we are not aware, we are not conscious of any inference, of any effort, and therefore the self-attributions have the marks of directness and immediateness. It's not inferential, it's not evidential, it's just something that we, like out of the blue, happen to have. The problem, as I already advanced, indicated by Wittgenstein, is that these phenomenal properties do not reveal the mode of production, and that when we go into the self-observation model, there is the private language argument, we run into problems, because I think that Professor Leclerc made reference to this, the importance of language in building this shared world. This requires a degree of objectivity that cannot be guaranteed at this private or this self-intimate model. So I argue, particularly in the paper, for the need for an alternative model of the production of the self-attributions, and the way to look for this alternative model is in this practical tradition, this practical view of self-knowledge, and trying to understand why it is that it has this transformative power, no? And why it is that it's forceful and can change our priorities, or can influence realizing what we want, can change what we want. And also, I think that what is required is not to view it's a model of self-attribution that doesn't generate a schism between self-attribution and other attribution. As you know for sure, the Cartesian view of the subject created the problem of the knowledge of other minds. And in fact, if you view in historical terms, one could say that the modern tradition that placed the subject as the condition of possibility, to put it in Kantian terms, no? The condition of possibility of the world, but at the cost of leaving the subject out of the world. And as long as the subject is out of the world, because it's the condition of possibility, is the point of view from which the world appears, no? We have problems in introducing the others into this picture, and that's why Solipsism was proposed as an alternative in Directness, for instance. So we need both. We need a different model and one that doesn't generate another problem of other minds. And one move that I think it's interesting, because it also shows the limits of this approach and the need to go further. But a move in the direction of a practical view of self-attribution it has been developed by Crispin Wright or by Kilby Grammy, following the Davidson's Constitutivism, which is a view of that tries to link the possibility of self-attribution to the fact of being an agent, something like that. It's like a condition of being an agent that you have some sort of first-person authority. In this way of putting things, since Davidson, there is no commitment to a self-observation model. But the fact that they do not develop an alternative an alternative model of the production of self-attributions, it's what makes this approach, or this way to conceive of first-person attributions as defective, because
just as like a stipulation. If you are to be an agent, you have to be taken as authoritative on your self-attributions. In so doing, I claim that they, in fact, are honoring the marks of first-person attributions without accepting the self-observation model. But still, they assume the asymmetry, epistemic asymmetry, and they assume also assume that the directness and immediacy of first-person attributions. In Wittgenstein, it was an effort to try to find a different model of production of first-person attributions, the Exclusivism, that has been subject of nice discussion, and we also have a chapter in the book on the limits of Expressivism, but I'm not going to deal with that here because I want to go to the practical. And to discuss both Wright and Wilgram a little bit to motivate our alternative model of the production of self-knowledge, of first-person attributions. So for Wright, first-person attributions are not a cognitive achievement, are not the result of an effort of knowledge, but it's rather part of an institutional practice that of intentional interpretation. Maybe I think you also mentioned Dennett, and then it might be also related to this interpretivist view of intentional attribution. Even if Dennett is not concerned with first-person attributions, but that could be interesting to see how that might be developed from his perspective. That is not his view. His view is more theoretical, of just third person, even for first-person attributions. But for Wright, it's a part of our practices of in agency, of joint agency, just to take the word when somebody says, I believe that P. So that counts as the fact that the agent believes that P. So the fact that I self-attribute me a belief counts of suffices for me to have this belief, and nobody has to question or to challenge this way of proceeding. It's taken as an institutional practice. His proposal is inspired by the response or judgment-dependent properties like core laws or other subjective qualities. In Cartesian terms, one would say secondary qualities that are response-dependent, so that if it seems red to me, it's red. That red is that it seems red to me. There is nothing else in being red. And that's the model he tries to apply to self-knowledge, so first-person attributions. Of course, he is aware that we might make mistakes, or might sometimes make first-person attributions without proper attention or without proper grasping of the concepts involved in the attribution. And so he hedges this proposal as an ideal conditions proposal, so that by first-person attribution suffices to grant the truth of the attribution, provided that I'm properly attending the situation and I mastered the relevant concepts involved in the attribution. And even more risky, he also tries to say that we have to exclude self-deception from the picture. So this constitutive thesis just works, just holds when I'm not self-deceiving myself.
the reasoning is that self-attributions are constitutive of the content attributed, unless we have these grounds for doubt, that are these situations that may not call into question. But the objection arises that if there can be third personal or non-subjective grounds to doubt the self-ascription, then this involves, in my view, that there are grounds also available that make true the self-ascriptions. And so this, it seems to me, that calls into question the constitutive thesis. So if there are conditions that may falsify a self-attribution, this seems to involve, by coherence, that there are also conditions that have to make the self-attributions true or correct. Well, if we think of self-attributions as just interpretations of who I am or why I'm behaving this way, but they are causally inert, then they shouldn't be these evidential grounds for calling into question self-attributions. But the very phenomenon of self-deception, and the fact that Wright doesn't say that it's not possible self-deception, but recognizes that self-deception can happen, seems to cast doubt on the initial assumption which is that self-attributions are guaranteed, are not challengeable, are something that can be, given that they are direct and immediate, they hold true. Because we can have self-attributions that may prove false, as in self-deception. And what's interesting, in addition, is that the reasons to consider that somebody is in a situation of self-deception are not available from the first point of view, by definition, because if they were, then it would not be self-deception, but a case of cynicism or bad faith. By definition, the self-deception requires that the evidence that calls into question the self-attribution is open to others, but not to the subject making the self-attribution, because otherwise wouldn't count as a case of self-deception. And in my view, what this involves is that self-attributions are submitted to intersubjective constraints. They can be challenged. They have to be acceptable, credible, convincing, or truth-like, or whatever. The sort of authority that characterizes self-attributions is a sort of discursive authority. In some situation, maybe nobody is able to challenge what I say, but that doesn't involve that what I say constitutes the truth of what I'm self-ascribing. If something new, some new piece of information were to appear, we might challenge the self-attribution in all cases. It's just that by pragmatic reasons, unless we have anything relevant to call into question the self-attribution, we don't do that. In Bilgrami, we also find a vindication of this, of a pragmatic view of self-attributions, of first-person attribution, but in a different way. It's not just interpretation, a form of interpretation of making sense of myself, but it's a variety of the constitutive thesis in that it vindicates Strawson's strategy in his way of dealing again in the debate on freedom versus determinism, on freedom and resentment.
where Strawson says that, well, the context is the debate on utilitarianism and the way that punishment may be justified. And a utilitarian justification of punishment is in terms of the consequences that may have to avoid that behavior. But what Strawson's remarks is that we don't deal with each other in such a way as in terms of consequences, but we deal with each other as persons able of responsibility and of emotion, moral emotions in reaction to what do to each other. His concept of reactive attitudes, I think, is the most interesting or the most powerful precedent to the notion of second-person attribution, even if Strawson doesn't deal with the question of attribution, but it's implicit in his description of the dynamics of reactive attitudes among agents, that they are not attributed through a form of theoretical reflection, inference, or in a spontaneous, direct way of dealing with each other. But Bilgrami takes from Strawson just the first part, the idea that we take agents as responsible, morally responsible for what they are doing. So they have to know what they are doing to be really agents. And self-attribution is just part of this authority of the agent, of this practical authority. Since I'm the agent who is in charge of my behavior, I must know. I am in a position to know better than anybody. But notice that in Bilgrami's explanation, the self-attribution or first-person attributions have to be restricted to currently held mental states. They have to be occurrent mental states to make sense, because I'm just authoritative when I say I'm thirsty, or I'm tired, or I'm fond of I don't know, Supertramp, whatever. But the structure of agent responsibility is not restricted to my current states. And also my responsibility and my agency extends over time and connects me to my past, to my previous actions, even my previous thoughts, but also to my future, my aspirations, my expectations, what I want to, my projects, my purposes, what I'm trying to. I also even to counterfactual situations. What I might think were that situation to happen. It's not something that happened, but I also authoritative about that in a way, as an agent. And the phenomenomic marks of first-person attributions, remember, directness and immediacy that focus or underlined by Descartes as the basis of his epistemological project. The directness and immediacy also apply to these memory states or prospective states. I'm not just self-attribute that I'm tired, or I'm willing to drink, but also I have, with the same phenomenomic dimension, the experience of my past desire of eating, or my future project of going to the mountain for a walk tomorrow. Both past and future self-attributions have the same phenomenological marks. However, for the constitutive thesis to go through, has to be reduced just to current, occasional or current states, as if they were necessarily conscious, because that's the mechanism that the only way to have this, to guarantee this privileged access to these mental contents. But again, as also anticipated, it's not just occurrent mental states that we attribute ourselves, but also dispositional states, attitudes, habits, motives, lifelong intentions, values, whatever. If we want to understand us as agents, we cannot restrict this view of agency and self-attributions and limit it to just to the conscious occurring mental states, because we can also attribute states that are not currently conscious, but are because they have this dispositional nature. As a matter of fact, I think that when we analyze and we are aware of the complexity of our agentive structure, we have to concede that we may be blind to our current intentions and motives. We may be misled, and or maybe ambiguous, or maybe not clear about why we did that. In fact, when I don't know in Brazil, but if this were given in Argentina, well, your neighbors would understand perfectly well, because they are fond of Freud and psychoanalysis. But you don't need to be fond of psychoanalysis to realize that psychotherapy works by helping people to realize who they are and why they behave that way, and to become more clear on their motives and deep beliefs and attitudes. So what we get is that we have examined a move towards a practical understanding of first-person attributions, and seeing that these moves are wanting because they just try to cut with the theoretical Cartesian view, but they don't cut with the, they are still in the grip of the epistemic privilege of the Cartesian view. It's just that they try to not explain the epistemic privilege of first-person attributions in terms of a self-observation model, but in terms of some sort of constitutive thesis about what is to be an agent, be it interpretive or more practical. But I think that this, if you are following the argument, then you are prepared to take the next step, which is the real challenge, that is to call into question the authority of the first person. Of course, we have already provided arguments and evidence that supports this step, that we are not authoritative. So we are trying to call into questions the cornerstone of the Cartesian view of self-knowledge. But also, I think this step is required to realize that self-attributions may require an effort, as not something evidential and out of the blue, but require this effort of self-knowledge, of understanding oneself in the practical domain. Of course, for this move to be convincing, we need to account for the directness and immediacy of the self-attributions, because we are not calling that into question. Of course, there is an epistemic asymmetry. I'm not saying that we have to go through a process of inference or theory understanding, that this would be probably Dennett's way or the Carruthers way of making sense of first-person attributions. this theoretical functionalist view of the first person. That makes no difference, no asymmetry between third person and first person attributions. No, I think precisely because this self-attribution may play this central role in our mental economy as agents, and they have this power of transformation, they cannot be just, they cannot be the same as when we observe somebody else doing something, and trying to explain what's the mental state behind or the intention behind that behavior. And of course, we need an alternative to observation model, that not just to say this is a fiat. No? Given that you are an agent, you need to, by definition or by the constitution of an agent, you automatically are guaranteed this possibility of the valid self-attributions. For doing this further step, we need to realize that to insist in the previous point, directness and immediacy are not by themselves the marks of epistemic authority. They also mark attributions of past mental states that may be wrong. So the fact that we first person attribute a content to ourselves doesn't guarantee that it's true, the content attributed. And this is the way to call into questions the privileged, the idea that our access to our own mental states is privileged. I also mentioned the dispositional, the possibility of dispositional mental states, the possibility of self-deception. There are plenty of empirical evidence on the lack of reliability of self-reports and self-attributions. And we could also go deeper into the interplay of first and third person attributions as they happen to develop, for instance, in psychotherapy or just in the reflection. When I think of myself from the outside, I take myself from another, I may improve my understanding than if I just try to reflect on my inner states, on my introspection. So the final challenge is to account for directness and immediacy then. And how is it that self-attributions have these characteristics? And also, as I advance, to do it in a way that doesn't generate a schism between self-attributions and other attributions. And it is here that the second person attributions that Diana introduced the other day is useful. In those attributions, at least in our view, we directly perceive mental states of others. Directly, non-inferentially. Of course, at the subpersonal level, something has to happen to be able to see in those expressive and intentional movements or changes a mental state expressed. In the book, we try to go to pains to explain that a view, or to develop a view of emotions that includes as part of the emotion this expressive dimension. And also, we also do developed another argument. We can be seen from an evolutionary point of view, is that focus on the interconnection between the abilities to directly perceive bodily configurations as expressive of mental states, and the fact that especially our face, but not just our face, our hands. You see that my hands doesn't stop. Have evolved to be more conspicuous, to be able to express more richer contents. It is especially clear in the fact of the eyes are in the same plane, that they have a sclera that allows us to focus more effectively on the eyes, and all the muscles of the face that allow the configurations of the emotions. So there is a sort of a co-evolution of our ability to ascribe to others mental states, particularly basic emotions and intentions, and the fact that our bodies have evolved to be able to express, to be rich in resources to express, to manifest, to make our mental states manifest. So directness and immediacy are not just marks of first-person attributions, they also are marks of second-person attributions in face-to-face interactions. So the phenomenology of attribution by itself doesn't tell us how the process takes place, how we reach the attribution. Of course, the way we reach first-person attributions have to be different from the way we attribute second-personally states to others. And one has to be geared to our perception resources and our experience of our body from the inside, and while the others has to be related to the processing of expression. In both cases, the way that we reach the attribution is experienced as direct as immediate. I sometimes put the example of the way we understand speech. We don't hear sounds in the frequency or the wavelengths and then theoretically infer the meanings, but we hear our meanings. Our experience, our personal experience is direct and immediate of the meanings. But of course, this is mediated by personal processes that make possible to recognize these meanings in these sounds. But similarly for mental states. These also are the result of an implicit knowledge of these configurational features that allow us to recognize intentions, the movement, the changes in time. In our, I think Diana mentioned this fact that these attributions, in second-person attributions, are contingent, the result of integration of the contingency of the movement of bodily movement of another with our own reaction to contingent reactions to those movements. While first-person attribution have to be concerned just with the changes that one interoceptively detects. But both descriptions have the same dialogical discursive authority that already introduced. So what it remains to be done for me is to convince you that we have a model of production of self-attributions that is not self-observational, and that is not theoretical either, and that is connected to our cognitive development, in that we are progressively able of more sophisticated self-attributions, and that these attributions have a practical import. So we need, what in our proposal, the elements we distinguish is that right from the start, we come with a sort of self-model, a sort of body schema. This has been, the idea has been developed by different authors. In the book we mentioned Neisser, we mentioned also Gallagher. You might remember that Gallagher distinguishes between body schema and body image. So the basic element of oneself as a body is the body schema. Of course, the body schema is not present from a start. It's also an achievement of the coordination of movements by the baby, but it has an increasing understanding how things change as the body changes, and the effort of coordination muscles to be able to carry out goals. And on the other side, we need this cognitive development to be able to increase our capacity to categorize our experiences. Also the experience of ourselves as a body in interaction, and to apply these concepts to our own experiences. As a matter of fact, this prioritizes, put the emphasis on the interaction as the way to achieve this mastery of the relevant concepts. I think this is something I want to briefly emphasize, because it amounts to a different view of the second person from Davidson. The Davidson way of characterizing second person, it makes intersubjective interdependent with objective and subjective as three angles of a unique triangle. In our account, the second person perspective is the basic one, both ontogenetically, phylogenetically, but also conceptually, in that it's through the interaction that we master the concept that we require for attributions, be it second personal or first personal later on. But without interaction, so the priority is the priority of the interaction. Only through interaction will we become able of self-attribution, self-ascription, self-attributions to oneself. This is the nucleus. This also explains the developmental pattern of self-attributions. Self-attributions are not right from the start. They require long development, especially what are called self-aware or self-conscious emotions like envy or proudness, or and in our characterization of this process, we combine this phenomenic self in terms of this body schema of oneself in the space, moving in space, but also oneself moving in interaction with others. So this interpersonal self, that both the schemas have to be coordinated and provide the grounds for the conceptual development that sustain our self-attributions. We also, I suppose that Diane insisted on that, our self-attributions have two sorts of concepts. The concept of the mental states that we self-attribute or attribute to others, beliefs or intentions or emotions or desires or goals or whatever, but also the content that the attributed. The other component of the second person attributions is that these contents are transparent, are not propositional contents. I'm going to just to mention, to remind of this aspect of the theory. And so in the end of this process, we develop this interpersonal self that allows us to interact with others and to realize the patterns of reaction that we experience out of this interaction. And the idea is that self-ascriptions are the result of the internalization of the second personal capacity to attribute to others. And as a conclusion, these attributions, the first person attributions, have the same authority as second ones, which is not maximal authority, but just a form of discursive authority. We can be wrong, as we can be wrong in our ascriptions to others from the second person stance. We also can be wrong in our attributions to ourselves. And self-ascriptions, as a result, also can be revelatory, can help us, can provide us insight on ourselves at the practical level, because it's not just focusing on something that's there, it's in some way scripted in special file. No, it's a realization that these different elements or actions or situations make sense as they reveal some intention or some emotion or whatever. And this is especially relevant in cases of conflict, which is where we need to resort to a reflective attitude, to deliberate, to try to make us clearer about what we want or what we want to achieve or what we know really in the situation. And I think I have to, I better stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. We have time for questions. So, Sandy, the first inscribed. So go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much for a really, really lovely and rich talk. There's so much to say. Let me ask just one brief question. One of the things that's always puzzled me about self-knowledge was raised by the papers by Crispin Wright that you mentioned. I think, although I don't remember for sure, he called this theoreticity, which is the idea that my first-person judgments about my own mental state, standing mental states, have to cohere with my overall behavior. And one of the puzzles, and I think this is going to be a puzzle for me for your view too, one of the puzzles for me for any view that appeals to the practical, the constitutivist view, is how it is that we are moved so effortlessly to form these first-person judgments that in fact cohere with our behavior. And how we do it even though we don't reflect on the evidence at all. That strikes me as an interesting question. It strikes me as a question that a theory of self-knowledge should be able to answer, but maybe to put it slightly more provocatively, the fact that we're able to do this so well and so often and so effortlessly does suggest to me that perhaps our authority is epistemic and not merely, as you call it, discursive. So this is an ill-formed question. I present it to you just to hear your reflections on this.
I have to say that it's put in a very kind way, even if it's almost an objection, a general objection. Now I know that it's sort of a provocative way to. That's why I try not to go straight away to say that we don't have privileged access to our mental states. But if you think of the traditional view of self-ascriptions, the privileged access is just claimed for occurrent mental states that happen to be so because they are conscious. And what's implicit is a view of consciousness as a form of you remember maybe this jargon of the subject and object. The subject becomes object of the subject. That's the dialectics of Hegelian dialectics, but it's this tradition. The one way to there was somebody talking about Husserl, but I wasn't clear enough this afternoon if it was in approval, out of approval or not. But I think Husserl is the last one that tried to explore this way and see the limitations. And when we try to include the others and try to include our behavior and our responsibility for what we do, the self-consciousness, self-observation model shows its limitations because it just can be held for the current mental states. Well, we have, as you said, I think I agree. We happen to try to make sense of our behavior in a very easily and without much effort currently. It's just when we are in some sort of puzzlement or difficulty or conflict, as I said at the end, we need to go for deeper reflection, to examine our life in more detail but well, it's up to you to come up with another model that goes beyond this. I think that the fact that we are continually behaving and trying to make decisions, of course, make this easier. But it's not because, so if you think of this in terms of, in Wittgensteinian terms, maybe it's easier. I just can make conceptual sense of myself through concepts that are also useful for making sense of others. So I don't have concepts just from the inside. They are the same concepts. So I don't have a way to make clear. It just by acting, because I make sense through this, the concepts that we all share. Maybe it's not so.
You're satisfied, Sandy? Yeah.
Well, it's a nice. I mean, it's a hard question. So, and I appreciate the reflections very much.
Okay. More questions? I saw Maria Dionis. Please.
Thank you very much for your brilliant exposition. I agree almost 100% with all your conclusions. I always had a problem in understanding where would be your memories. When we think of other people, if we don't give too much weight for a language, from a direct perspective, how can we explain our memories of somebody else or your perspective? Thank you.
Well, my background is in philosophy, but I ended in a psychology department for, well, a little bit of serendipity, no? But the answer to your question has to do with our memory capacities. We have psychological theories of memory that try to explain why different sorts of memory stores, short-term or long-term, and how we manage to keep track of our experiences. And there are differences between declarative memory and procedural memory. It's not the same way that we can remember the phone number, for instance, or the way we can remember the way to make coffee, for instance, or to ride a bicycle. And so memories can come in very different fashions. The most interesting ones in connection with what we were talking about are autobiographical memory. Maybe that's the one that you were more interested. Yeah, this is also well, would deserve a whole account. What we know about autobiographical memory, the most important element that we know is that autobiographical memories depend on emotion. The episodes that we live, that we remember later on, are the ones that have an emotional impact. They are the ones that are more memorable. But we also know that each time that we remember one of these episodes, the episode can the memory can change as we do this effort of retelling, of making explicit or reactivating this brain, or the mechanism is not very well understood yet, but it has to do with the brain activity. But of course, we know that memories can be fallible, even the first person ones, and we can be sure, we can have the sense of certainty that it was me that did something, and this may be a false memory.
Thank you.
So it fares pretty well with the general account.
Okay, Leonardo.
Hi, Tony. I really appreciate your talk. Thank you. And one point in special you have approached is this about psychological process can be computationally mediated while being experienced as direct and immediate. I think it's very interesting, and I thought a lot of things about that. So I would like to question you if it is possible, for example, to think this computational psychological process not in the way of independent modules, but in which way do you think this computational process can happen to give us the experience, the direct experience? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. This is a dimension that the book doesn't solve. So don't expect to find much in the book on this. We do a little bit of hand waving, in the sense that we just propose an account of how this might take place, and several examples, and there is a whole chapter on psychological phenomena that seem to exhibit these marks. Maybe let me explain or try to provide an answer to this question with one of the experiments that we did, and also in the book. It's a form of the Turing test, but very simplified, in a very simplified form. You remember that the Turing test consisted in a human having to decide whether he or she was interacting with a machine or with another human. But in the way Turing thought of the task, the communication was through computer screens. So you couldn't see the other because obviously wouldn't be interesting. What we did was try to find a minimal context of interaction. It was through a sort of simulating line in which you as a participant could only move an avatar that was something that moved horizontal. And along your movement, you could come across somebody else, another avatar. And when the crossing took place, there was a sound, beep, 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 beep. And the task is to say whether you are interacting with a machine or with another person. And we are able to tell pretty accurately whether we are interacting with another, because if we are with another, what it generates is this pattern, beep, 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 because the other agent is also trying to make sense of your behavior. Well, if you are interacting with the machine is not sensitive. It doesn't pay attention to what you do. So here you have an example of a process that it's, let's say, neurally or computationally, if you want, complex, very sensitive to a time window, very precise of milliseconds, but that we don't have any idea that we do it that way. But at the personal level, what you detect is interaction. I'm interacting with somebody, I'm not interacting. If you call one of these companies that have answering machines, you may start trying to a dialogue, but then you realize that the machine is not answering you in really, but just a recording, and you make the difference. Just like language, you don't process wavelengths, you don't process prosody, and from there theoretically infer what's the meaning. We just hear that. So the first part of the reply to your question is, we must be able to tune to these very minute and specialized cues that express or that are connected to these patterns of interaction that allow us to categorize our experience. But the interesting thing about our psychology is that we have this conceptual level of experience. We don't know how concepts get activated, but the fact is that we make sense of our experience in categorical terms. In the other book, the other that Andre mentioned, the verbal minds, I propose a theory of the impact of language in redevising the cognitive functioning or workings. And I would say that this conceptual level of experience has to do with the fact that we use language. But for this, I don't have a knockdown argument. It's just more like a suggestion, a way to try to make sense of the evidence than the only explanation. I think it's the best explanation, but some very clever people don't agree, so I wouldn't say I have the final word on that. So it's the combination of both. At the basic level, we process very particular, very time-sensitive dimensions, but we also have this this level of categorical experience that we come to develop through becoming verbal.
Thanks, Tony. I think too this computational stuff happens in the interaction. So it's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, more questions? Tony, I'm very much interested. Felipe.
Felipe Eleuterio raised the hand.
Go ahead, Felipe.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Professor Gomila. Well, I'd like to ask you something that it has been struggling me for quite some time. And I don't know if you could answer. I've already asked the same question to Diana, but I'm trying to understand the idea of second-person attribution, so I can understand the constitutional personal identity of how the process of recognizing the other as a person by recognizing their mental states. And there are occasions where we can recognize the other as a person in second person, no way. So what my question is, the idea that we make a second person attribution in second person relationships isn't somehow trying to convey two different ideas. For example, the idea that we are attributing the dynamics is of attribution. So it's a situation of that is contest independent. I don't know if it sounds. And at the same time, we admit that we can perceive directly the meaning of the other's conduct and on their expressiveness. So isn't it contradictory somehow trying to convey these talking about second person attribution, the idea of attribution? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yes. I'm grateful for the question, because this is the element of originality of our proposal. Most of the second person theories
view of, just to speak about second-person interaction as something that takes place without any form of psychological attribution, because they typically are anti-representationalist, and part of the motivation for this attitude is to avoid to get involved in a metaphysics of the mind that involve representation, something like that. I think what we can avoid this danger, but our first effort is try to characterize what's happening in second-person interactions. So interactions in which more than one agent is involved, and the interaction is mediated by some recognition, perception of psychological states. So part of the going this way, we make second-person interactions by definition those that involve second-person attribution. But for this to make sense, we need also to explain that there are interactions which are not second-personal. These are the interactions in which we just interact in physical terms. For instance, if I push you, or if you pull me, or if I fall down and make you fall in turn like a domino, or we just happen to be moving up in a stair and cross each other. All these are forms of interaction with those that doesn't require any form of attribution. That doesn't mediate by an attribution. Then we have a set of interactions that are still not second-personal in that they do not involve second-personal attributions, but they are relevant enough because they provide opportunities for the cognitive development, for acquiring the concepts that may give rise to second-personal attributions. And this is maybe this may be ambiguous, because it requires dealing with babies, of infants, processes of development, or processes of interacting with a chimpanzee or a dolphin, in which maybe these situations are asymmetric in that one of the agents have the conceptual abilities for the attribution already, but the other one don't. So it's not fully symmetrical, and maybe this provide the opportunities for the development of the acquisition of the concept. So in the book, we decided to include this basic form of coordination, like drumming together. Okay, we may synchronize, or we dance together. We may synchronize our movement even without making any form of psychological attribution. But if we happen to be able to get involved in situations of that kind, this provides the grounds to realize how there are these contingencies that are reciprocal. When I do this, this happens, and when this happens, I do this. And this provides the grounds to develop the concept of mental states at the end. This is tricky part. We try to do it for belief, particularly for epistemic tracking, as a basic form of keeping track of what you are looking at, in which maybe I'm not attributing yet what you are seeing, but I have to keep track of where you are moving or what you are paying attention to, even if the attribution is not rich enough, it's not in that terms yet, because we try to grasp or to make sense of this the developmental dimension. So we need to start very little and see how it grows.
Thank you, Professor. I don't know if it's ingenuity of my part, but even between adults that possess a conceptual language and use it to understand the other's conduct in a third-person way, established second-person relationships between them, and
Yes.
purely. So what I'm questioning is, what's the importance of the acquisition of concepts so these second-person relationships between adults occur? For these second-person relationships between adults to occur, it seems to me that it's not that necessary, but I don't know. And
Well,
for example, even though we can talk about it during the interaction, it seems that the meaning
yes.
is mutual.
That's exactly that we don't. This is we dedicated a chapter to the interplay of the different perspectives. So in an interaction, I may, at the same time, I can see your friendliness, but I may attribute to you an strategic Machiavellian plan to trick me, and I can attribute to myself sadness for your doing that, or for me not being able to be brave enough to I don't know, complain, whatever. So all the levels are involved, and we move, and there are situations in which you have to be very competent at playing at both levels. If you are a diplomat or a spy or a poker player, you need to be very good, or you're an actor, at controlling your expressive behavior. You have to be very aware of what you are expressing, so that you are not, what is the expression in English, giving away your real intentions, trying to manipulate the other. So it's a classical way. I need you to think that I'm helpful, or that I'm interested in your well-being, but in fact, I just want to sell you the last encyclopedia that's going to cost you a lot of money, and it's usually because you have Wikipedia for free. So it's basic. We don't say we start with second person and then we become theoreticians of the mind. No, we keep, and I insist that's very important for the practical dimension, because the practical, reactive attitudes, interaction with others in terms of moral terms, that's what really matters. We also say that second personal attributions do not guarantee a moral stance, a good moral stance. There have been some theoreticians, well, the first one that used the expression second person was this, too fast I wanted to say, that they have problems of memory. the IU book, who was the name of that? Well, it was a German. Bubber, exactly. So thank you. But so you can play with both. You are one, but that you are able to get into IU relationships, or second personal relationships, does not guarantee that I'm going to be willing to help you, or I have good feelings for you. No, I can do that, and in a tricky manner, or
that's gonna be enough. That won't be enough necessarily. Thank you very much, Professor, and nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Very well.
I'm surprised at how many, the whole community.
Yeah, indeed. I would like to announce and take advantage of the fact that there are many people here hearing that all the participants will receive a certificate by email along the next week, I believe. Okay. Thank you very much for that stimulating talk. I really appreciate it. I think that's unanimous. So thank you, Tony. It has been a privilege to know you face to face through through the technology that we.
Next time we'll have to meet. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
Secondperson.
The
great pleasure.
Balearic Islands sounds to be a very nice place to be. Yeah, yeah, it's okay. Maybe.
Andre,
okay. Thank you.
Andre, excuse me, just another announcement since everybody's here. You are going to receive shortly, all the speakers in this event, an email asking for permission to make all the videos available on our channel on YouTube. So please answer, because we can't make them available unless you give the permission, right? So you're going to receive that shortly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we have the closing session. Maybe it would be good to have a pause of 5 minutes, and then we come back with the closing session with Maria Eunice and Mariana. Okay, thank you to all.